Welcome to the Biological Sciences site. I will be your moderator for tonight. In order to provide you with better information about our group, you can check our website since 2011 that is composed by UMass graduate doctoral students. We invite every month our audience to share information on new developments in science. Today we'll be talking about biological evolutive biology, the National Foundation for Science, and the Protectorate for the Arts. You can subscribe via email and keep track of our activities. We're starting with a hybrid cafe. We have both an online and in-person event in order to make our events more accessible to all the audiences. If you have any idea or suggestion in order to make our events more accessible, just let us know. We have the SACNAS organization. There is in charge of promoting Hispanics, Native Americans, and Chicanos to obtain the careers in sciences, technology, and mathematics. I'm going to present our speaker today, Dr. Ana Caicedo. She studied biology at the University of the Andes. Then she obtained a doctoral degree in Washington and also a postdoctoral in the University of North Carolina. Since 2006, she's been professor at the biology department at UMass Amherst. And today she's here to tell us about her advancements in research on weeds. What is a weed and where does it come from? Well, Coral, thank you so much in the first place for having me. That's a great question and a little bit complicated. A weed plant is basically a plant that grows wherever we don't want it to. Most of the people are acquainted, familiarized with several plants that grow in our garden, so we call it a weed. But this goes beyond that. This can be a pretty subjective definition. Because what if I have a plant that I like it, and it comes there like without me planting it? Is that a weed or? So basically, I work with agricultural weeds, and there we have a more technical definition, more objective, less objective. For example, in agricultural fields, you have a crop, and you have one plant, one single one, that has not been planted yet or is growing. That by itself, it's a weed. Let's talk about a little bit more of domestication. How does this entangle? What does it have to do with weed? Let's think about an agricultural environment. We have three types of plants. Number one, in the agricultural context, I have some slides that I would like to share with you so I can explain myself a little easier. Can I control the slides? That's the one I want. Very well. Thank you. Well, when you see here, three types of plants. We have wild plants. These are plants that grow in the wild, and some of them we have profited from them. We take them and we incorporate it to our agricultural system. We have domesticated crops. Those are the ones that we have purposefully taken into the agricultural system. And then we have the agricultural weeds. There are invasive species that invade crops. So the relation among this is built in agricultural terms. This has a evolutive feature, an evolutive nature, because, for example, a weed can generate from crops, and there can be a hybridization from that. So your question was about domestication. I would say We can leave that for a little later. We can just talk about the domesticated plants. These are the ones that we have transformed to serve a purpose for us. We have taken wild plants, we have applied what we know artificial selection, and we have came up with plants with particular features that we are interested in. For example, larger fruit, sweeter plants, plants with a better yield. All this has been done through domestication. So weed plants are plants that we have not transformed, that we have not integrated to the agricultural environment. So how long has this been happening? Wow, that's a huge question. It is believed that we humans have started to do this process for about 10,000 or 12,000 years. It's a continuously evolving process. Plants, domesticated with plants, take a long process for this to happen. Is there any competence that we can understand between the weed plants and the domesticated cultivated? Indeed, that is the big problem, and that's the jeopardy this weeds bring to humans. So let's take a look at this slide. You can see here some of the problems that weeds bring to the agricultural soil. So we have domesticated plants for 500, 1,000 years, say. So we have created we have modified the environment to create an agricultural environment. So other plants seek to take advantage of that. They seek to integrate these plants, what we formerly call the weeds, have been with us forever, 10,000, 12,000 years. So the archaeology let us know that always we can see remains of weeds. So they have been bugging us forever, for a very long time. So what they do is that they integrate in the culture, and they start a competence for resources, water, nutrients, soil, light, you name it. Basically, they are in a struggle for all the resources that the agricultural plant can use. So the yielding of the product is going to be lessened. So you have a loss in productivity, and this is very serious. This is big consequences. Weeds are one of the most important causes for the loss in agricultural yields. And what this means is that we are losing food because of weeds. The yieldings could be larger, but we are losing them. So humans, they need to use larger portions of soil in order to meet the food demand. And when this is a need, that means that we need to have a stronger affectation, a stronger impact over land. So conservation gets pressured. So weeds create or are meant to create an environmental crisis too. They contribute. So what is the question again? How can we study the evolution of a weed? Well, there are several ways in which we can do this. In my lab, what we have mostly done is by genetical tools and mechanisms. We're trying to understand how, through the time, these weeds have been changing genetically. And what is genetics, you will ask? Basically, this is the study of how features are inherited and passed on across generations. So every single living thing has a DNA, which is a genetic material. It's basically a chain of nucleotides that brings the instructions of how to assemble, if you can put it like that, a being, a living thing. So genetics studies is interested in knowing, finding out what are the traits in passing on this generation after generation. But what can the DNA tell us about wheat? Well, by studying it, we can discover what are the oldest or the evolution on from this wheat. What are the ancestors of this plant? By studying DNA, we can also identify which are the genes controlling very specific traits that bring this powerful and robust feature to wheat to make it to survive, cause it to survive. So there you come with the question: what is a gene? The gene is, let's say, we have the DNA, and we can see the chain of the DNA. They're immensely large chains, very long. So all together, all these nucleotides belong into one cell. That's what we call the genome. So one gene, it's a tiny bit. It's the unit, the smallest unit of those nucleotides. So that tiny bit codifies, brings instructions within of how to assemble a particular feature, the substitution, the placing of a protein, a DNA chain, and so on. So how do we go about genetic analysis? Well, there are plenty of ways. Actually, particularly, it depends on the question you're formulating. Depending on the question, you have a method to get to it. If you want to study DNA, you collect a plant, you remove tissue, for example, leaves, and you ground and open the cells, and that causes, by the use of some chemicals, the extraction of DNA. And then it comes sequencing. There are very sophisticated and incredible machines that help us to create, to carry out DNA sequencing, so we can find out what is contained inside. And once we get this information, it is not easily obtained, we can start comparison across different types of plants and see what are the relations among those features. This could be a one way, broadly speaking. Tell us a little bit the background of your investigation. How do these plants get to become a weed? But let me ask our audience and find out if they have any questions. If you have questions over Zoom, feel free to send your question. Question, so I can rephrase it for. So she was asking, what are the most common types of wheat in agricultural fields, as in maize or different, or more the most common types of crops? There are plenty. That's a very broad question, because wheat happen, they come up, they're raised in different crops, but there is an infinitude number of plants that actually may become wheat, more than 8,000 in agricultural fields. You have 250 that are the key ones, but still is a large group. So it totally depends on the type of crop. You wanted to know about specifically maize, corn. I don't have a lot of experience in this agricultural crop, so I couldn't tell very specifically.
if you have domesticated plants, how do those domesticated plants become weeds? Did you say genetically? Okay, genetically domesticated. So talking about plants that are uh, genetically domesticated, they can become weeds or not. People who work in plant modifications and to create uh, genetically modified cultures or harvests, they are creating uh, plants that are, for instance, more resistant to bugs and insects, or that are more resistant to pesticides. But we're not considering a very important thing is that we are cultivating, we're harvesting those plants in an environment where the land is prone to growing weeds. So they can kind of mix with those weeds or plants that were already there. So we have to create cultures that are genetically domesticated, that cannot mix with other uh, familiar crops, because of that hybridization, that modified gene could go into the weeds and create a new uh, weed that's resistant to pesticides. So that's a very important issue. Another question? I wasn't here when it started. He's apologizing for being here late. What's the chlorophyll of a plant? It's basically a molecule that plants have that they use to get the sun's energy. So these molecules give the plants the green color that they have, and they use the energy from the sun to do photosynthesis, and they produce sugars and glucose. We're going into the second part. What's your lab's focus? I am interested in how plants adapt to an agricultural environment, both weeds and domesticated plants, but weeds are so successful in adapting to new environments. So my main focus is in these weedy plants. It's not the only one that we study, but we do, it's my favorite is the weedy rice or wheat rice. And what is it and why does it interest you? It's a rice, a type of rice that behaves as a weed. I have another slide to show you how this weedy rice looks like. It's a type of rice that behaves as a weed and invades the harvests of cultivated rice. And this happens in the whole world. So everywhere in the world where people are growing rice, we are going to find this weed. And we grow rice in many parts of the world. It's very closely related to the cultivated rice, and it causes problems like it lessens the productivity, and it looks so much like the cultivated rice. So you can see here a field. This is a cultivated rice field here in the United States, and the darker parts is the cultivated rice. And if you can see, there are a few patches that look lighter, so that's the weedy rice. So that's an example of how invasive the weedy rice can be. Another picture I wanted to show you is that there's some shellings. Those are the grains, and it looks like that, red. So because it looks red, a lot of people call it red rice. And then you're asking me why, and why do we want to study the wheaty rice? We study this rice because uh, it's it's a very it's a wheat that has a very big impact in the world, in a worldwide agriculture. And rice, it's the first it's the first means of it's one of the main diets for more than half of the world. What are the questions or issues that you want to understand with your study of with the wheaty rice? We want to understand how these wheaty rice, we want to see what the origins have been in each part of the world. We're also interested in understanding what are the characteristics that the wheaty rice is so successful in cultivated fields, and we want to try to control the genes that help this wheaty rice be this successful. And how do you do your investigation? We do our investigation using the same tools we already mentioned. We collect wheaty rice from different parts of the world. We extract the DNA, and we use that DNA and compare it with wild rice, with cultivated rice, and we try to understand where the wheaty rice has come from. And then we also compare the wheaty rice with the cultivated rice to see the key characteristics of the wheaty rice that helps it be so successful. We also try to mix the wheaty rice with the cultivated rice to see which are the genes that control these characteristics. For what can I see, the investigation has been very extensive. Do you work with somebody else? Yes, so I think the next slide is to show you and give you an idea. I mentioned that the wheaty rice grows in everywhere in the world. I haven't studied all of the countries in the world, but this is an example of collaborators that I've had in the past years to kind of understand the origins of the wheaty rice. So this is a very collaborative work. I need to work with other people in different parts of the world. And what have you learned with your studies? I have another slide. We've discovered things that for me are very interesting. The main one, or the main discovery we've made, is that the wheaty rice in different parts of the world has evolved independently, which means that if we look at the wheaty rice in Spain, this has an independent origin with the wheaty rice in Colombia and in India, and an independent genes from the wheaty rice in the USA. So the wheat rice has evolved many, many times. Another thing we've discovered is that the wheaty rice most times has evolved from domesticated ancestors. So what I wanted to show in this graph is that we have the wide the wild rice, which is the ancestor for the agriculture from the domesticated rice. And then we have different types of rice that are harvested. And then from that cultivated or harvested rice, domesticated, the wheat rice has come from. So the evolution of the wheaty rice has come from a domesticated harvest. What has happened is that we have a harvest that, or a culture that has characteristics that we like. So we've had, so we've domesticated the rice to have characteristics we like, and then the wheat has grown from that and become a rice that we don't like. The wheat have been very problematic to agriculture since humans have started harvesting the land. So it's been thousands and thousands of years that we had to deal with wheat. One are monocultures. When we see the same culture the same year and then the next and then the next, we create a very stable situation. So, and that this enables the weedy plants to adapt. It's harder for weeds to adapt when there's a harvest rotations. And then when we mix harvests as well, when we have two different harvests in one field. Another practice that we have uh, that we are using more pesticides, and we are creating a selection for weeds that are resistant to these pesticides. So your lab still continues to investigate weeds. Yes, we still have a lot of questions that we want to answer about weeds. I can give you some examples in the next slide. Because I had mentioned that we are very interested to know what are the characteristics that make weeds so successful. I think one of the most important is the presence of what we call shelling. When we have a weed, when that's what we call shelling, is that when the plant grows, the seeds fall to the ground by itself. And what happens with domesticated harvests, uh, that doesn't happen because men wanted that to happen like that. Humans have selected during the domestication so to lose that shelling. But when this wheat plant evolved, it evolved again to this shelling. And one of the things that we're trying to understand in our lab is how that happens, how this shelling evolved, and what are the genes responsible for this. So we are trying to understand what the genes were involved in this domestication of the shelling, and how the weed evolved and what genes were affected to provoke the shelling again. So is this evolution the same in Spain and Colombia or different? We also study other weeds. We are interested in weeds that happen in cranberries. I don't know how to say cranberries in Spanish. It's not arándanos. in weeds that happen in lentils that are different from the ones that we are used to, but that resemble their lentils that we know. And we also are studying the domestication of tomatoes. We have another time to answer questions from the public. I have 2 questions. Good night, good evening. When you mention wheaty rice, you're talking about a rice that you eat? Or is it a plant that you can't eat? Is it a type of rice that's wild, or is it in science we
which we use. Because sometimes one thing can be interpreted and misinterpreted. When we use the word wild, we talk about crops, plants that grow outside of the field, outside of the agricultural soil, and therefore we are not working with that. Wild rice is not, weed rice is not wild. It, interestingly, it only grows when we are growing rice, but it's genetically very close to the rice we know, the rice we consume, but we don't eat it though, because the seeds of this wheat rice fall off. They can be actually pollutants of the harvest. Actually, we normally the overall rice, the common rice, it has a little bit, it contains a little bit of that. But normally these seeds tend to escape. We can eat it. It is edible. They're so closely related that the taste is not even different. Another question. I'm from Puerto Rico. And in Puerto Rico, we have a lot of problems with, for example, Monsanto. In Puerto Rico, actually, we had this legal affair battle. She comes from Puerto Rico, and we had a legal struggle with Monsanto. I don't know if you've heard of that. So if you know anything about it, what would you tell us? Well, I wouldn't know what to say. I don't know if you want to elaborate a little bit more on that. Well, I was there in Puerto Rico when they had this project consisting on the herbicides. They are the pesticide company worldwide, and they negatively affected the livelihood of a lot of people there. They brought the chemicals they released in the ambient damaged the livelihood of many people. And then we saw a legal struggle. There is no obviously the media transcendence over the United States because they want to keep that secret. But you as a professional, in terms of the agronomical sciences, and you as a professional, what would you like? I mean, do you have anything to tell us about that? Simply put, Monsanto was a struggle between Puerto Rico and this company that was releasing herbicides to the crops, and this one it turned out to be very damaging for the community's health. So her question is, what is the relation between Monsanto and the proliferation of weed? Are they generated from prior crops that have been harvested and created before? Do you have any knowledge about that? Well, my knowledge is limited, I have to admit. I would say herbicides are chemicals, and chemicals, they have often terrible side effects. So the less chemistry we use into crops, there's a lot of interest actually that they are seeking for alternative ways of handling weeds and pests. The use and the overuse of these herbicides, they beyond the health problems that bring to the human, have a direct impact on the resistance the weeds may have toward that. So there are lots of herbicides, but there are also alternative ways that we need to find to better control those if we want to succeed with that. Has there been any opportunity in which the weedy rice takes over the structure, the agricultural structure, and that we end up actually eating those grains of rice? Do you think, I mean, is that thinkable as a possibility? That is a very interesting question. In many places around the world, you see fields in which farmers grow cultivated rice, that at some point they have so infested of this weedy rice that they had to quit it, they had to leave it behind. And one of the most important features of this wheat rice is that the grain is huge. And another feature is that it has the dormancy, the seed dormancy, which means that the seeds fell off the tree after shedding, they remain in the soil, and they can remain there for ages, entire years, just waiting for the best conditions to grow. So you can have a field in which you have many seeds, and they grow this year, the other ones will come next year, and so on and so on. So you will see that an entire field can grow to the extent that the farmer has so limited amount of edible rice or crop rice as that they have to leave it behind. So that normally ends with a change of crops, and the lookout for other crops that sustain and they are not suffer from the problem of weedy rice. The question is, the effect of this weed can be associated with with seeds or another side grown related to the plant itself, or basically the seed would bring the problem. What I'm understanding from this question is where does infestation comes from? Like the very first infestation of the field. That's what I'm sensing in that question, is right? So both those explanations are plausible. Rice with the rice, back in the day, someone just grew regular rice, and the seeds have been dormant there for many years. And then someone else just decides to grow regular rice, and boom, weedy rice grows up. But we can also have the phenomenon that you want to grow rice for the first time, so you purchase regular rice, and this happens to be polluted in a combination of weedy rice. And actually, this is more common than we can think. Not in wealthier countries with like the United States, where you find farmers with the ability to purchase high quality seeds. But think of the case of Colombia. Farmers exchange seeds, and as long as that happens, this harvest gets polluted, gets contaminants from this weedy rice, and therefore you have you find yourself growing both without knowing it. So let's move on to part 3. Beyond the extent of your research, you seem to have an outreach role as well. They're in the lookout to create a more academic and extensive role. You are one of the co-founders of La Mente Boya. It's a blog that has been written for academics that are deaf and we're hard of hearing. But tell us a little bit about that. Why did you decide to start this undertaking? Let me give you a little context before I go straight to the point. Let me see the next slide, please. Would you like? Yeah. What I want to display here is something that you may not know. And is that disabilities in the farming population are quite common. 26% of adults in the United States have any form of disability. But overall population, for example, when you go to university, you discover that only 4% of the staff and alumni students have disabilities. So what we see is a huge problem of misrepresentation here, basically because we have many misrepresentation and underrepresentation of persons with disabilities. And this is due, we believe, because the support mechanism are not there as a person grows in their career. So there are no scaffolding systems for university students with disabilities. But what we see is that as we progress, they lessen until they become new. Let me see the next one, would you? Look at this. I have a disability. I have slight audition losses. I depend a lot of my headset, and that's why we have needed a repetition from you every time we have a new question from the audience. So but I happen to be faculty. I am a university teacher, professor. So I've had the experience of this lack of support for people like me. When you reach certain state, as you progress, scaffolding lessons and lessons more and more. So in this graph, what you can see is how people that are hard of hearing, you can see how the higher educative level we have, the less we progress to the following step. And the next thing is that this disability, the one I have, it's not new at all. It's everywhere. We have 14% of adults with this type of disability in working age. They're losing their hearing, but again, it turns out that we are misrepresented. Let me see the next one, please. The next slide. Will you? Thank you. Okay, so this is our blog. The mind hears, escuchas con la mente, the mind hears. So this blog, we started with a colleague, Michelle Cook. She's from the Department of Geosciences. And she, just as me, has a tendency to lose hearing. And we were talking about the difficulties, so we decided that we could create something. And we have this objective, to diminish the isolation. So we decided that it was time to create a network of deaf academics, people like us to understand able to understand what goes on with our lives for deaf and hard of hearing professionals, academics. And the next one is mutual support. So we're looking to share experiences and strategies that we have used to overcome our professional challenges. So how does it look? The way we have overcome this, and see how we can create new ways to overcome this.
Celebrating diversity in STEM, and it has many chapters around the country and a lot of activities to try to support people in minority groups that are interested in having a career in these areas.
I
I
know
know
you.
you have experience in SAGNAS. Talking a little bit about me, I'm a student that was just transferred from Western Massachusetts, and I have now transferred to finish my bachelor degree in industrial engineering. So my first semester is been in UMass Amherst. I did my first semester, so I don't have a lot to say. I haven't participated a lot, but SAGNAS is an organization that I liked since the beginning. Because it not only helps a lot of people, it also promotes to it also promotes people knowing people from other countries. I know it is a society, and I know not all communities offer that. His conference was in Puerto Rico this year, so that was very important to me. So I am rooting for all of Latin people to go far. The first one is look for a community of people that understands what are the difficulties you have and that helps you celebrate good things as well. I think that something that has become easier these days because of social media. But first of all, look for a community. Search for a community. This is something I would tell myself if I could go back in time. Another thing I would say is that you have to persevere. A career in science is very often very hard. Like all careers are hard, but there will be hard times, and this is more true for people that have disabilities, but for those that don't as well. And then you have to keep going. And the last thing I would say is that you have to be flexible and creative. Yes, having a hearing loss is going to present difficulties. It's going to create barriers, but don't take this as something that has to is going to cut your road. Just be flexible. If things don't work one way, just try a different and go on. So thank you very much for sharing what you do. Now we have another chance to some questions from the public, from the audience. Where do you see yourself in 5 years from now with your investigation in weedy plants? What do you think might happen? I hope that in 5 years, we are able to finally identify uh, what's uh, what's producing or what gene is enabling the shelling in the weedy rice. We are still not there, but I would like to identify that gene. Would be very interesting in a evolutionary point of view. I don't know if this is interesting for you, but this is very interesting for me, is that the shelling, when one creates a cultivated grain, one does not want the grain to fall by itself, but it doesn't want, one doesn't want it to be hard to peel it either. So if we can identify the gene that controls the shelling, this can also help us create harvests. We can fine tune the level of the shelling to facilitate the harvests. It would be something very useful on agricultural point of view. And I think I'll be here in UMass working with weedy rice here in 5 years. Thanks for joining us in our final life science event of the year. We will start again in February, and we will start the 2023 with a cell biology panel where we will be inviting 3 cell biologists to tell us all how to know about cells, how cells move. This will be in English. And if you would like some more information, we have a website. And besides that, please don't forget to complete our registration forms so that we can keep offering events about themes you would like to know more about. We will be also organizing events for uh, members of our community that have hearing loss. We want to thank everyone that was here, and thank Dr. As well.